Hello, hello, hello.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we are requesting you to please come back to the conference room. We will be starting shortly. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we are requesting you to please join us back in the conference room. We will be starting shortly. Please take your seats, keeping the exits and the aisles clear. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we are requesting you to please come back to the conference room where we will be starting the next session shortly. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats and turn off your phones. We will be starting shortly. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we will be starting shortly. Can I request you to please take your seats? Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, can we request you to join us back in the conference room? We will be starting shortly. Let me remind you that all delegations are encouraged to submit their statements to the conference room officers. A form to request to speak should be completed to ensure that you are recognized by the chair. For statements in a UN official language other than English, kindly submit your requests early to ensure availability of our interpretation services. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats and turn off your phones. We will begin shortly. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats and turn off your phones. We will be starting shortly.
Good morning to everybody. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the meeting is called to order. It is indeed an honor and privilege for me to assume the responsibilities of session chair for our consideration of agenda item 2, regional perspectives on progress on the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. Specifically, this session will discuss the theme of empowering people for a more inclusive and equal Asia Pacific. The document pertinent to this session is titled Empowering People for a More Inclusive and Equal Asia and the Pacific, ESCAP/RFSD/2019/1/Rev.1. This session is structured as follows. We will start with a short video on voices from the field around the theme of this session. Then we will have a moderator panel discussion along with interventions by few selected discussions on the theme of the session. Afterwards, I will open the floor for the delivery of country and stakeholder statements. Let me now request the Secretariat to screen the short video on voices from the field based on the entries submitted by civil society organizations and other stakeholders from the region. Let me thank the
With its pledge to leave no one behind, The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is a commitment to empower people, reduce inequalities, and promote social, economic, and political inclusion. In preparation for the 6th Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development, we asked how empowerment, inclusion, and equality can be promoted. Consulting with over 600 stakeholders and reviewing relevant sustainable development goals and targets, we arrived at 4 key elements of an empowerment inclusion approach in policy making, namely rights and justice, norms and institutions, participation and voice, resources and capabilities. Through these elements, let us look at some stories on empowerment and inclusion from the region. Persons with disability confront numerous stumbling blocks in accessing basic rights. In Pakistan, the provision of resources in terms of wheelchairs and integrated classrooms helped empower girls like Malaika to fight norms that exclude persons with disabilities from schools.
मैं बड़ी होकर डॉक्टर बनूंगी ताकि लोगों की मदद कर सकूं.
Older persons in Nepal were asked, do you feel secure within family or society at old age?
त्यो त बुढाबुढीसँग कोही पनि सबैको आफआफ्नो गर्न पर्यो.
In Nepal, enabling older persons to access lifelong learning and advocacy for their rights empower them to remain active members of the society.
मलाई कति खुसी लागेको छ क पनि जान्यो अब त्यहाँदेखि हेर्न जाने त के गर्नु हैन यो मोबाइलको चाहिँ सबै कता कता के छिट्नुपर्छ कहाँ गर्नुपर्छ त्यो सबै जान्ने भए म त.
At the same time, challenges such as climate change are posing new risks that disproportionately affect the most marginalized communities. In the Pacific, creating repositories of indigenous knowledge, norms, and practices have proved to be instrumental in climate resilience and ecosystem management. Often, women are disproportionately affected by climate change, with gender norms exposing them to high-risk livelihoods and domestic responsibilities. In Uzbekistan, enhancing women's capacity for adaptation to climate risk was made possible through targeted formal training of women from over 200 families. Regional collaborations are critical for empowerment and inclusion. A coalition of regional activists are helping to collectively strategize and participate in regional and global processes relating to tuberculosis, thereby amplifying the voice of people living with TB and ensuring their rights. Similar regional initiatives and partnerships have great potential to foster empowerment and inclusion of vulnerable groups. Empowering people and ensuring their inclusion and equality can greatly accelerate progress towards all SDGs.
Let me thank the civil society organizations and other stakeholders who submitted those videos which were useful in bringing daily life perspectives on various efforts to empower people around the region. Let me now invite the moderator of the panel, His Excellency Rajiv Kumar, Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog India, to take over the session.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome again, Excellencies and delegates and friends to this first panel session. And I would now like to welcome to my right, His Excellency Mr. Fidelis Magalhaes, Minister for Legal Reforms and Parliamentary Affairs, Timor-Leste, who has just taken over from me as the chair of the 6th Asia-Pacific Forum on Social Development. And His Excellency, Her Excellency Ms. Khorel Batar, Vice Minister of Finance for Mongolia. Welcome, ma'am. His Excellency Ms. Semi Koralesovesu, Minister for Fisheries in Fiji. And then Ms. Deepu Moni, Minister for Education for Bangladesh. And Her Excellency Ms. Nino Tandil-Shaveli, Deputy Minister for Environment Protection and Agriculture, Georgia. Thank you very much for joining me on this panel, Your Excellencies. I think it's right for me to emphasize that the topic for this panel discussion and for the session as a whole is a very apt one, because we can't have growth and we can't have development without empowering people for a more inclusive and equal Asia-Pacific region. As I think was remarked by Her Excellency the Deputy Secretary General, the region has seen the growth of many and billionaires, and it is probably now it can boast the highest number of high net worth individuals in the world. But at the same time, I think we need to make sure that we have not left anybody behind. And as our Prime Minister, the Indian Prime Minister, continues to emphasize, we have to have development which carries everybody forward. And unless we have that, we won't be able to sustain the social coherence that we have in our countries and in the region as a whole. So I think the topic is very apt, and here I think some of the some of the initiatives that have been taken across the region, whether it's for education and it's for health or environment and sanitation and even agricultural development, I think key to this whole approach and to this whole effort at making our development more inclusive. It's my pleasure to point out to you that in India we've done in the last 5 years some major measures and reforms in this regard. You might have heard of some of these. One is, for example, what we call the Jan Dhan Yojana, which is the scheme to open bank accounts for the people at the bottom of the pyramid, for those who have been excluded, who have not had access to formal credit and banking services. And you'll be glad to know that in the last 4 years, we have opened more than 310 million such accounts, out of which 78% are also that for the women. And these now have about $3 billion as deposits in those accounts. So for the first time, we can say that nearly 98% of our population is probably covered with the formal credit system. The Jan Dhan account, these accounts that have been opened, along with the huge spread of the mobile phone and our unique identity system called the Aadhaar, constitute what we call the JAM Trinity, the Jan Dhan, Aadhaar and mobile. And I'm sure you know that we have now more than 930 million mobile phones in the country and about 980 million unique identity cards. As a result of that, what we've done is to use that trinity to make direct benefit transfers to all the beneficiaries, so that we've cut out the leakages in our country in the benefit of our, in the transfer of our benefits to the people. And that has meant that the leakages have stopped, and I think we have led to a huge amount of savings in government expenditures and the availability of these benefits to the people. This really is brings me to emphasize the role of good governance in our countries, in our region, for achieving inclusion and for achieving better inclusiveness and lower inequality. I think governance, good governance, transparent, efficient, and accountable delivery of public services are the key of having our inclusion. And our own government, led and the Prime Minister, continues to emphasize the fact that you have to have governance which is more and more accountable to the people whom it represents. I think that's the second condition in our case, for better inclusion. Similarly, in India, we've done one other major, which is the development of what we call the aspirational districts. We've identified 115 out of the 703 districts in total that we have in the country, 115 as what we call them as aspirational districts, which are really the most backward districts in the country. And the idea here, ladies and gentlemen, is that if we can develop them and if we can bring them to the national average, then we will we'll achieve a huge progress in the inclusion statistics of our country. So the aspirational districts program is now very much one of the core programs our country. The third, ladies and gentlemen, is that we've, I don't know if you must have heard that we've launched very recently what we call the Prime Minister's Jan Arogya Yojana, which is the health insurance, the public health insurance for 500 million people of the country, the lower 50%. They're now all covered by a public health insurance system. And it's heartening to note that in the last 6 months since this scheme has been launched, we've already had more than nearly 2 million beneficiaries getting benefit out of this scheme, and it will spread very quickly to all the beneficiaries that I mentioned, which are about 100 million households or 500 million people together. So in our country, we have, and Niti Aayog, the National Institute of Transforming India, which I'm lucky to be heading, we have focused very much on what the Prime Minister calls Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, which means all together for an all-round development. And that's the motto that we've adopted in our work. And I dare say this is something that we have now tried to project as our main development philosophy for ourselves and for the region as a whole. All of this, ladies and gentlemen, we're trying to capture it in our recent publication called the SDG Index, which we have brought out in collaboration with the UN system, the first of its kind, where we have identified a large number of indicators on which we rank our provinces on the achievement of the SDGs. And we are hoping that this ranking and putting it out in the public domain will foster competition among our provinces to achieve the SDGs. And that would ensure, in our view, that SDGs get mainstreamed in the development policies and development programs of our regional states. So I think this is something that I would request the index. It's available in the stall outside, that all of us can have a look at it, and maybe that is something that we will want to adopt in other countries as well. Let me now start with His Excellency Mr. Fidelis Magalhaes, Minister for Legal Reforms and Parliamentary Affairs, and let me just ask him as to what role does he think legal reforms play in empowering the marginalized communities in your country and in the region as a whole, the role of legal reforms in improving inclusiveness and empowerment for our people. Mr. Magalhaes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Excellency Rajiv Kumar, members of the panel, panelists, and distinguished delegates. Going to the question posed, I would like to, first of all, to give you a brief background information as to where have we hailed from. When we started as a nation state, starting from an early 2000, precisely in 2002, we found ourselves in a situation or in a condition where there was a horizontal level of economic development or of poverty, where precisely there was no middle class, and most of the Timorese citizens were poor. But then, after 2002, when we became an independent nation state, the country began to develop, and as development progresses, as the country moves forward, there is a vertical growth, by which there is benefit of growth, but there is a 0.29 with regards to Gini coefficiency, which shows a certain rather weakening of our previous data. It used to be 0.28, and now it's 0.29. But the government, recognizing that there is an improvement, there is now a middle class being developed, or we have now a middle class, and reflecting that the economic development has benefited more people, the government should remain conscious of the question of inequality, and the government is doing all the necessary efforts to make sure that there is a more equal development. So with that in mind, the new government in which I take part has decided to establish a ministry, which I happen to be the minister, which is the Ministry of Legislative Reform and Parliamentary Affairs. And now, what do we do, and what is the relevance of the work we do? When we became independent, again, as we are a new nation state, we inherited legal systems, both from the previous Indonesian legal system and UN regulations. And Timor-Leste is a country where you do have strong customary practices. Now what the government is doing is to make sure to recognize the hybridity of the legal system and to identify the gaps in the legal system in the country, and making sure that the legal system becomes harmonized and unified and simplified. But what is the relevance then on the question of inclusion and the question of inequality? Timor-Leste is a country of, as I said, hybridity, of diverse linguistics, social and cultural backgrounds. But the first thing to do is to make sure that the laws are being made in a simple, understandable, accessible to all citizens, and in a language understood by the citizens. That's why now the first effort we do is to translate all the laws into Tetun, which is the lingua franca of the country, which is a co-official language, to make sure that citizens do understand what the laws say. Secondly, we also make sure that there is an ex-ante and ex-post consultation in the drafting of laws, which will include all the vulnerable groups in the society. So the government now expedites the process of consultations before laws are being made and being forwarded to the parliament. And we have recently in February, the government has endorsed a national government resolution which imposes the requirement for regulatory impact assessment or impact studies with regards to all laws that are to be passed. So we are obliged to listen to the voices of women, of youth, of LGBT, or all the vulnerable groups in our society, to make sure that the laws are inclusive and that the laws are being done in the interest of protecting those who are most vulnerable in the society. And so I think this, in brief, these are what the initiatives that we have done, and we will continue to, through our work, to address the issues of future establishment of institutions that better promote inclusion. So there are two important components. One component is reforming laws with regards to the organization of state institutions. Second component involves the protection of fundamental rights and the promotion of an inclusive society. So that's all I can say for now, and I look forward for the subsequent sessions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And we now want to hear from Her Excellency Ms. Khurral Batar, the Vice Minister of Finance for Mongolia, a country of which I have very special regards because I worked there as a country economist for the Asian Development Bank. So I'd like to really always catch up. Your Excellency, promoting social protection is critical to empowering people, and you've done a lot in this regard in Mongolia. And I'm really intrigued to ask you that as to how did you manage to find the resources, the financial resources to create a social promotion safety net in Mongolia?
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. Mongolia, let me draw you a brief picture about Mongolia. About 30% of the population of 3.2 is under the age of 18. Over 60% of the population is under the age of 35, so we're a very young country. And actually our dependency rate, the number of young people and elderly people on those on the working is actually quite high. This also at the same time puts quite a lot of strain to making sure that especially the young and the elderly are protected, especially throughout this, development stage of the country. For instance, on the health, we have universal health insurance coverage, full subsidy for vulnerable and the herders. We have quality, available, and affordable healthcare throughout the country. And for children, we have universal and free education, early children nutrition through higher meal allowances, indexed to cost of living. We also have what we call the Child Money Program, which covers about 80% of our children receives on monthly basis. A small sum, but overall we believe that especially from the day that they are born, if they save it up, this will cover their, for instance, their tuition fees and so forth. For those who are employed, it's universal social insurance coverage for sickness, maternity, and working injury, replacement rate of maternity benefits for 100%, reinforced employment promotion program, and return to work and retraining program for victims of accidents and occupational disease and unemployment insurance. In fact, about 56% of our population has received a social protection system, and this accounts to about 21% of our public expenditure. We have, especially on the children's coverage, we are one of the highest, especially taking into consideration that the world norm is about 35% of the children have coverage. In Mongolia, 80% of the children have coverage. This was as high as 97.8%. From 2017, we have implemented, we ran into some economic difficulties. We have been implementing IMF Extended Fund Facility Program, under which we had to implement some prudent fiscal policies, for which we actually had to make some cuts in some of the social costs. But at the same time, what we did was, rather than cutting expenditures, to make sure that it's targeted, that it actually reached the most vulnerable groups. Just to give you a number, for instance, in 2003, around 350 people, 50 million people had, 1,000 people had been receiving social insurance, and in 2018, around 2 million people. So you can see the increase in the coverage. A number of things that have been, initiatives that have been taking place is, for instance, especially in terms of the replacement, reinforcement employment promotion program, and return to work and retraining program. We have established a fund, what we call Employment Promotion Fund, which is funded from companies that receive employees from abroad. They have to pay to the fund an amount of minimum wage per month. And this fund is to fund programs for retraining of the employees and retraining of the unemployed, to ensure that they can go back into the workforce. We have also our social insurance and our pension fund, especially given the fact that such a large number of programs are being funded from the social insurance fund, have been depleting in the last few years and had to be heavily subsidized actually from the state budget. So what we have been doing in the last 2 years is we have increased the pension age by the same exact year of the increase in the mortality rate of 3 months, and we have also increased the streamline into the fund by increasing the social insurance as well, both from the worker and also from the employer at the same time. We do see quite a lot of strain on the state budget. And one of the things that we have been doing is, this is a new initiative that we have been taking with UN and UNDP and also ADB in Mongolia, is we have started the last 2 years SDG-based budgeting, a pilot program within our 2 line ministries. This has been proven to be especially important in times of economic difficulties, because what we see is, probably I'm only one from the Ministry of Finance here, is our line ministries, they provide us a budget proposal of all these line items. Sometimes we don't know which derives into which project, or what sometimes the outcome is and how it relates to the SDGs. What we're trying to say, and then in the end they will say, okay, how is the progress on the SDGs are going? And they will say that the Ministry of Finance has cut the budget. But looking at the budget, we can't relate what the budget, how the budget item actually relates into the SDGs. So what we have asked them to do is, if you can propose us the budget in terms of how it relates to the SDGs, it will make it easier for us to make the assessments. And sometimes in the Ministry of Finance level, and I think it's the same everywhere around the world, especially in developing countries, we make very manual cuts, not knowing exactly what the impact would be, especially in ministries like the health, especially in Ministry of Environment. So what we've been doing is, last year we did this on the Ministry of Health, and this year we're rolling it over to Ministry of Environment. And if it goes well, we're trying to implement it throughout the government, that the line ministries would be able to budget based on the SDGs, and at the same time report back to Parliament on their budget implementation on the SDG-based based budgeting as well. So this is a new initiative that we're taking. Ministry of Social Welfare is working also with UN on poverty reduction program, which we will also believe will be a huge force in this. One of the most important things is, even though we have been doing all this, in 2013, starting from 2014, what we did was assessment-based national dialogue. This is mapping and priorities for the social protection floor. And the outcome of this study has revealed that we have to spend, by 2020, around 4.7% of our GDP towards social protection. This is quite high, and this is going to be difficult for all developing countries. And especially when you implement an IMF program, it requires you actually to cut some of the expenditures. So what we've been doing with ADB and with World Bank is to do an analysis of how the impact of the social programs are going and how can we target it even further. So these are some of the exercises that we've been taking.
Thank you very much. I think there's a lot to learn from your experience to carry on the social protection schemes while implementing an IMF EFF program. So thanks a ton. I now request His Excellency Mr. Semi Koralawesu, Minister for Fisheries in Fiji. We know, Your Excellency, that Fiji is one of these countries where climate change is a real issue, and you face existential questions on that, and especially because of the fishing communities that you have, and how would you successfully harness social norms and traditional fishing rights and indigenous knowledge towards the empowerment of disadvantaged groups in Fiji? It would be wonderful to know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Firstly, I'm excited to be taking part again in this very important regional forum, the Asia Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development. 2 years ago, I witnessed the adoption of the regional roadmap for implementing the Sustainable Development goals in Asia and the Pacific. Much has happened since then, but much more work is needed if we are to deliver the 2030 agenda. The Pacific is a well-known vulnerable fishing community. Our exposure to climate change and its adverse effects has been well documented. Sea level continues to rise, our ocean is becoming warmer, storm surges continue to worsen, extreme weather events are the new norm now. Islands are sinking, communities have been and will be relocated. This will become more significant and pronounced as the nexus between climate change and oceans continue to gain traction. But we remain optimistic. While we wait on climate change and ocean science to give us further solutions to address these problems, we have had to rely on many traditional and customary rules and norms that govern how communities use natural resources sustainably. These include the taboos by chiefs and elders in our society, example, to restrict fishing period to allow for spawning to take place, as well as an ecosystem understanding in resource management reflected in ridge-to-reef or watershed-based land tenure. There are numerous examples of where informal systems contribute to sustainable management of natural resources, including their conservation. A good example is local community-based approaches to management of coastal fisheries. This is an area of notable achievements in the region, with local management being the primary mechanism for managing marine areas in most of the independent countries of the Pacific. The efforts of communities and supporting partners, whether governmental or other, resulted in 12,000 square kilometers of marine areas being under active management, of which 1,000 square kilometers are designated as no-take zones. This has been useful for Fiji, whose fishing communities depend on oceanic and coastal fisheries for food security, livelihoods, revenue, employment, and development. Traditional fishing practices have influenced the sustainable management tools such as seasonal ban, traditional tambu, and marine protected areas. Our coastal communities enforce traditional tambu during morning period, during spawning season, or when fish stocks are depleting. The lifting of the tambu is only allowed through sustainable harvesting methods that allow for small fish to be released back into the wild. This traditional practice has served coastal communities well and will continue to ensure sustainability. Fiji recognizes that there is a seamless connection between land and sea, and this is relevant in our legislation. Over 80% of the land is owned by traditional land-owning units, and this extends by traditional custom fishing grounds. The consent of the owners of customary fishing grounds is required before development projects, major or minor, is undertaken. We already have the building blocks for further embed the environmental dimension of sustainable development goals, in particular SDGs 13 and 14. But we need to further empower our vulnerable communities, especially our fishing communities, because they play an important role in our collective effort to build climate resilience. This requires legitimacy, information, and agreed decision-making process accepted by the fishing communities and by governments. Legitimizing customary and traditional knowledge will play a significant role in our national climate discourse strategy. Furthermore, to address knowledge gaps, information is crucial and needs to be made available for their benefits. Their decision-making process, a wheel already in motion, can be improved to support adaptation measures. This includes the setting up of fishermen's associations, which I have strongly supported. This association can work with governments, NGOs, and private sector in an integrated, coordinating approach as a platform for sustainable initiatives. To support community empowerment, we are addressing the gaps in our legislation, particularly to the extent of which fisheries legislation can facilitate climate change adaptation. Including regional, international organizations, Fiji is updating its legislation. Lastly, when reflecting on local and traditional norms, I am reminded of how Pacific communities use the traditional Talanoa session to achieve consensus-based decisions to address challenges such as those I have mentioned. We introduced this in the global climate change negotiations to complement existing processes to address this pressing problem. But we cannot do this on our own. We need to enhance regional cooperation, collaboration, and partnership. I thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I do want to here, just for a brief moment, point out the importance of diving deep into our own traditional practices that we have, because they have been for a very long time supportive of environment and climate, and as Fiji has done and shown that these can be very important in our effort for environmental protection. Our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, heads the largest ministry in Bangladesh, and one which you will agree is the most critical, is perhaps one of the most, if the most critical, in improving inclusion and equality of opportunity. My great pleasure and honor to invite Ms. Deepu Moni, the Minister of Education in Bangladesh, to make her remarks, and to ask her especially as to how they're handling women empowerment and women education, which is perhaps the key for this inclusiveness. Ms. Moon.
Thank you. Good morning, panelists, distinguished delegates. I'm very honored to be here as a panelist. As you have heard, Bangladesh has actually made remarkable progress in terms of educational achievements, especially of women. And we all believe that education is indeed a critical resource for empowerment. Under the visionary leadership of our Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, we are working hard to implement the SDGs. We achieved our MDGs well ahead of time, and we achieved gender parity. Our achievements came through our very strong political will, our firm belief in and commitment to people's empowerment, inclusion and equality, resource allocation, and effective collaboration amongst various sectors, public, private, and the civil society. Bangladesh adopted different strategies in empowering vulnerable groups, especially women and other groups, through education, and these are compulsory and free primary education for all between ages 6 and 10. All children attending primary and secondary schools receive textbooks free of cost. Education of girls up to grade 12 in public institutions is completely free. Teaching primary school children from the ethnic minorities in their own mother tongue, providing books free of cost to these ethnic minority children also in their own language. Providing braille books free of cost to children who are visually challenged, providing facilities for physically challenged, and also for children with autism and other neurodevelopmental disorders. We're providing stipends to children, especially girls, and the Prime Minister's Education Trust Fund is also there to fund meritorious but poor students, not just of school, colleges, but also at university level and up to if they want to pursue education at the PhD level. Providing midday meals also in schools. You see, attracting best qualified workforce for teaching profession remains a very big challenge. In order to cater to that requirement, massive program on teachers training is going on. Several programs to ensure quality teaching in classrooms through a project called Promote, creating opportunities for the unemployed women to have teachers training in rural areas to get employment in rural schools and as well as in health centers. There's a project called Generation Breakthrough, which has contributed in improving the adolescent hygiene, sexual rights, and raising awareness about gender-based violence, improving sanitation, water, hygiene, and infrastructure in education institutions for better education and health outcomes, providing multimedia classrooms in most schools, providing ICT education in schools for enhancing quality education as well as upgrading skills of pupils, modernization of the curricula of the madrasas, including peace-building education in curricula, reforming the curricula to include human rights, women's rights, peace and justice issues, creating awareness about and preventing student aggression, bullying, extremism and violence. We are trying to do all these things through better coordination amongst the, as I said before, the public and the private sector and the civil society. And finally, we're trying our best to match our intention with finances. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, pleasure now to invite Her Excellency Ms. Nino Tendal-Ashvili, the Deputy Minister for Environment Protection and Agriculture of Georgia, and ask her to tell us as to how they've successfully involve local communities and organizations in making their environment protection measures more effective. Ms. Nino.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates. It is my pleasure to participate in this forum and in this session, particularly on behalf of the government of Georgia. I would like to thank the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific for letting me participate in this very important session. There was a clear message from our moderator that in order to ensure the good governance in the country, it's important to have transparent governmental institutions and to involve the public and relevant stakeholders in the decision-making process. And this is particularly relevant for the environmental issues, and this is particularly relevant for environmental decision-making process because no single decision which is related to the environmental issues can be made without the involvement of the relevant stakeholders and public. And this is one of the priorities for the government of Georgia because as a part of the Aarhus Convention and also, as you well know, Georgia has started its EU integration process quite actively. We have introduced the relevant regulations and new laws to support the public to become active in the environmental decision-making process, which means that we have the new regulations on environmental impact assessment, and there are public hearings organized at all stages of environmental decision-making, and no single large-scale or small-scale development project is approved by our ministry without the participation of the public and local population. And their voices are heard, and they are becoming active day to day and daily, actually. But meanwhile, what is important is to involve them in the process, but also give them education and also give them the skills to understand better the issues, to understand better the environmental concerns in their regions, and to become more active. And in this process, we also ensure the relevant environmental educational programs for the local population. We have set an unit under our ministry, Environmental Information and Training Center, which gives the trainings and workshops for the local population, and which supports them to understand better the key environmental issues in the country. And I could give you some couple of examples how the public were interested and how the public were involved in the process. For instance, very recently we had a new legislation on the waste management, and we have to have the waste management plans on all local municipalities, and the involvement of the public in the elaboration of waste management plans and waste management activities is very important, because we still have the problems when the people don't understand that the environment is theirs, of course, and they do need to care of that, and they do need to care about the waste management issues, because the country like Georgia, which is quite small but which is rich with its natural resources, with its landscape, of course needs to take care of its environment, because, and also need to deal with the waste management in a proper manner. And in this process, the involvement of local population is very important. And as the final remark, I would like to emphasize that despite the environmental issues, our ministry is dealing with the agricultural direction as well. And we see the development of the agricultural sector as one of the key priorities for the government. And this is also the key for us to reduce the poverty in the regions and in the rural areas of Georgia. As the country has a high potential for agricultural development, we have the various state programs for the local communities, including the agro insurance and other agricultural programs for young generation. Also educational programs for them to go back to their regions and to follow the agricultural activities in the countryside, which is of course one of the key priority for us, and which is also one of the tool which will allow us to somehow reduce the poverty on the local level and also on the rural areas of the Georgia. And as the last point, I would like to mention that without the proper education, we cannot achieve our results, neither in the agriculture nor in the reduction of poverty or in the environmental sector and protection of environment. And recently, our Prime Minister has announced that the education is a priority for the country, and the 6% of the state budget from 2020 will cover the educational programs of Georgia. Which I think that is very important initiative, because this will allow us to give the sufficient education and sufficient educational programs in different directions for free of charge for all those who are interested. And this will allow us also to support the young generation to become more educative and to become more active in the development of our 2030 agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now invite our four discussants to respond to the discussion that we've just had. These are representatives from ESCAP, ADB and UNDP, who are engaged in an Asia-Pacific SDG partnership since the time that we've had our Millennium Development Goals in 2001. And then that partnership, apart from coordinating the work of the UN system, has also produced several knowledge projects and examined sustainable development issues in the region. As part of the partnership, a report titled Accelerating Progress, an Empowered, Inclusive and Equal Asia and the Pacific will be launched today at 6:15 p.m. We have representatives from these institutions, and it's my real pleasure to invite Mr. Bambang Susantono, Vice President of the ADB, and he is the Vice President for Knowledge Management and Sustainable Development, to have the floor. Mr. Susantono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Asian Development Bank, it is an honor for me to join this distinguished panel. The theme of this year's high-level political forum on SDG is deeply resonant for our regions. Asia and the Pacific is home to more than 400 million people living in extreme poverty on less than $1.90 per day, but also the fastest growing number of the ultra-wealthy individuals, reminders of the scale and consequences of inequalities around us. I myself see them every day, for example, on my commute through Manila's diverse neighborhood to ADB headquarters office. Environmental stresses, including climate change and increasing water and natural resources scarcity, threaten to exacerbate existing inequalities in our regions. A new report that ADB, ESCAP, and also UNDP are jointly launching later today explores opportunity to achieve greater equality by strengthening inclusions and also empowerment. Resources and financing will be critical to realizing these aspirations. Our joint report considers the need for more equitable approaches to domestic resource mobilizations through taxations and public expenditure to meet the needs of those who are left behind. Fiscal policy and taxation system need to be developed and implemented in an inclusive and accountable manner with the needs of all people in mind, including the poor and the vulnerable. ADB is stepping up to this challenge. We are deepening our efforts to help countries modernize, simplify, and extend their domestic resource management as part of our public financial management. In 2017, we established a trust fund to focus on helping our developing countries strengthen their domestic resource mobilization efforts. We have supported benchmark studies on the potential for strengthening property tax regimes across Southeast Asia, including Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, and the Philippines. We have also supported poorer and more vulnerable countries such as the Solomon Islands and Laos to develop analytical models that can help them strengthen their domestic resource management system. One focus is on strengthening tax administration capacity in countries across the regions, including by harnessing innovative electronic information technology. A well-designed and administrative tax system can promote inclusions, encourage good governance, stimulate investment and job creations, promote social justice, and advance an equal society. So let me close by highlighting the ADB New Strategy 2030 recognize the challenge of addressing inequalities in our regions. It sets out an expanded, ambitious mandate for our institutions. We will work to realize a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable Asia and the Pacific, while sustaining our efforts to eradicate extreme poverty. Furthermore, the Strategy 2030 commits ADB to ensure that its future operations are designed to help our developing member countries to meet sustainable development goals and other global commitments, including the Paris Agreement on climate change. The first of our 7 operational priorities under our Strategy 2030 aims to address remaining poverty and reduce inequalities. ADB will increase its emphasis on social inclusions and human development, including by scaling up programming on job creations and financing for education, healthcare, and social protection program. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the time to pick up the pace is now, and we look forward to working with you to deliver impactful programs that help realize the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sudantono. The next speaker, and I have the pleasure to invite Mr. Hao-Lung Shu, the United Nations Assistant Secretary General, UNDP Assistant Administrator, and the Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific. Mr. Hao-Lung Shu, yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure for me to join this important debate and discussion on how to achieve equal and empowering people and more equal Asia and the Pacific. And let me make my discussion focusing on the central issue of inclusive governance as a means to achieve this goal. And we know that in Asia Pacific we have experienced a tremendous economic growth miracle and the poverty reduction miracle. Over the last 15, 20 years, the extreme poverty rate in terms of head count for East Asia has reduced from 61.3% in 1990 to 2.3% in 2015. For South Asia, this rate has reduced from 47% to 16%. Right. So this is no short of a growth miracle and a poverty reduction miracle. But let me point out 3 challenges that indicates that this economic growth miracle and the poverty reduction miracle has not translated into the kind of human development miracle that we want to see. Okay. The first is that the region is the most vulnerable, as it holds about 3/4 of the near poor who are highly exposed to any risks and shocks. Okay. These are the people who live between $1 and $2 a day, right? Poverty rate. Now in the new statistics of the World Bank and IMF, it's $1.9 and $3 and $2 a day, right? So the Asia Pacific hosts 3/4 of this population in the world. Okay, so we're extremely vulnerable. Okay, right. And the second challenge is that while the headcount poverty rate has reduced, it's a great story. But if you look at the multidimensional poor, that is people who don't have adequate access to services, right? Health, education, housing, energy, sanitation, clean water, and so forth. Okay, this number again is staggering. Out of the 1.3 billion people in the world that are considered multidimensionally poor, 664 million, right, are in Asia and the Pacific. Right? And out of these 664 million, 546 million live in South Asia. Right? So we have a challenge in addressing this more important issue of not just the headcount poverty, but more complex issue of multidimensional poverty. The third challenge I would say is that the Asia-Pacific is one of the most unequal regions in the world. I think the Vice President of ADB touched on it. Right? Asia-Pacific has 600 billionaires today, right? But the wealth distribution, the Gini coefficient of wealth distribution is about 85 to 90% in our region. Right? When we say in the world that 1% of the wealthiest people controls 50% of the world's wealth, it is mirrored in our biggest developing countries in Asia-Pacific. Right? So we have challenges that we see in many different manifestations. The kind of unmanaged migration, right? Social instability, the disenchantment of future generations, the rise of violent extremism, and so forth. Right? So we needed to take the issue of not only taking the sustainable economic growth seriously, but also extremely urgently to address the issue of inclusive growth in Asia-Pacific. Right? And the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Agenda for 2030, gives us the best opportunity and framework to achieve that goal. Right? But it is owned by all our governments. And we needed to have to use this opportunity to manage the shift of development paradigm from pursuing growth to putting the dignity of people at the center of our development. I think we all agree with this. Now, on the, just very quickly on the governance issue, I think evidence have suggested time and again that addressing inequality and the quality of governance is the best way to get middle-income countries out of the middle-income trap. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that. And it means that our governments, must adopt a more inclusive approach to development planning, resource allocation, and the government accountability. Okay. And one way that that is in the hands of our governments, okay, right, is to achieve a faster transition and transformation, right, of the governance approach from that of governing to that of servicing. Right. I think many of our governments are in this transition and have shown the way. The Vice Chairman of the Niti Aayog has given many examples of how Indian government is using inclusive approaches to addressing the issue of marginalized population. Okay, so I think my central point is that there are ways that we can adopt to address this pressing issue of inequality, right, and the lack of inclusive growth in the Asia-Pacific region. And the UNDP, like many other UN agencies and multilateral partners, have many initiatives that are innovative, that have shown results, that need to be upscaled by none other than our governments. And we look forward to working with you on addressing these challenging issues and achieve this goal of this panel that is more inclusive and equal Asia-Pacific. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Xu, and my pleasure to invite Mr. Andrew Ambrose from Borneo Dayak Forum to represent the major groups and other stakeholders to share his perspectives on the theme.
Adil Catalino, Bachuramin Kasaruga, Basengat Kajubata. Good morning, everybody. I'm known to my peoples and constituency as Atama Katama, a representative of the CSOs that met at the recent People's Forum. I also represent my Dusun Tambunan peoples of the Central Interior Region and Valleys and Plains of the Keningau district located in Sabah, East Malaysia. My organization, Borneo Dayak Forum, is a platform for self-determination of indigenous peoples of Borneo, collectively identified as Dayak, of which our ancestral territories are across 4 political regions in Borneo Island. I'm also the Asia focal point for the CSO Partnership for Development Effectiveness, or CPDE. Our engagement as indigenous peoples is underpinned by our struggle for self-determination, protection of our ancestral lands and territories, and our traditional government and autonomy, and for our survival itself. Ladies and gentlemen, you ask us today what change is needed to promote empowerment, inclusion, and equality for all peoples, so that no one will be left behind in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. I think civil society organizations and people's movements have been harping about these changes even right from the start of the engagement of the post-2015 agenda. Let us reiterate them once more. Colonial plunder and post-colonial economic policies that transfer wealth from poor to rich countries continue to widen inequalities within and between nations. It has been estimated that from 2014 to 2013, developing countries have already lost about 7.8 trillion from illicit financial flows, tax evasions, and trade mispricing by multinational corporations and wealthy individuals. This amount could have gone to priorities that target inequalities. Asia is now home to the most number of billionaires in the world, as I echo from the previous speakers. The region's combined income inequality measured by the Gini coefficient has increased by over 5% points in the last 20 years. We need progressive tax systems in order to make corporations and high net worth individuals pay their share. We'll produce resources for social protection, as well as services such as healthcare and public schools. At the regional level, illicit financial flows must be curbed through the establishment of a regional tax body to reform taxation architecture and energize regional cooperation on taxation concerns in this region of ours, Asia Pacific. We need development partnership to adhere strongly to development effectiveness principles in partnership. Financing the Sustainable Development Goals should not increase the role of the international financial institution, the private sector, particularly the corporations, the people's experience on the ground that these IFIs and corporations have had devastating impacts on the planet and the people. In both and moral and legal obligation of developed countries to fulfill their long-standing ODA commitments. On top of that, such commitments need to be increased. We also need partnership with people and North-South and South-South cooperation that follow the principles of human rights-based approaches and the development effectiveness principles, which are democratic ownership of development priorities, focus on results, inclusive development partnership, transparency, and accountability. Likewise, the SDGs cannot be achieved if the IFI policies and the current unequal trade rules continue to perpetuate poverty, land, and other resource grabbing from communities in developing countries. Existing unequal trade deals must be rescinded, and new mega free trade and investment agreements must be assessed for their impacts on human rights. Many countries continue to see the emergence of populist, patriarchal, and fundamentalist movements, authoritarian regimes, and conservative forces forward discriminative, racist, and sexist policies and law. This must be stopped. Government and the private sector must be held accountable for their commitments as well as their devastating actions. Governments must reverse not only the shrinking, but the disappearing spaces for people's democratic participation as shown by attacks against civil society organizations and activists and the people. We are being repressed by laws, vilified and killed because of our critical voices. Indigenous peoples, communities, and other marginalized groups continue to experience the terrors of militarization that often come with development projects. How can we expect free and prior-informed consent from communities, especially indigenous people, if they face these threats? On March 2016, a 14-year-long wrangle by the natives of 7 villages in Tongod claiming native customary rights to their ancestral lands had reached an amicable settlement through mediation involving the Chief Justice of Sabah and Sarawak and the Deputy Registrar. Only after 14 years, the case against palm oil plantation expansion, which involved 7 villages, finally recognized the several Dusunik tribes living in the area, making them and speaking their tribal people's language. Yet today, ladies and gentlemen, there are hundreds, if not thousands of cases like this yet to see access to justice. And from where I come from, it has been 56 years since we have seen justices coming from the MA 63. Today, we call on you to stop these attacks. These changes are what we can do towards the much more needed transformation, the transformation of current development models that perpetuate the exclusion and disempowerment of marginalized peoples and further deepen the inequalities between and within countries, between men and women. Only if we make this transformation can we truly be able to achieve equality, inclusiveness, and empowerment for peoples of Asia Pacific. And we have here a copy of recommendations on how to make development and development cooperation effective and latest, which can be found in these books. People are the power, taking up the action, making all the awesome change right now. Stand up for rights, join in the fight. Never let the supremacist ever come back. We need you to wake up. We need you to rise up. We need you to wake up. We need you to rise up. Adil Catalino, Bachuramin ka Saruga, Basengat ka Jubata.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambrose. And our last discussant representing the ESCAP is Mr. Kaveh Zahedi, the Deputy Executive Secretary of the organization. Mr. Zahedi.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, Mr. Rajiv Kumar, Honorable panelists, Excellencies, friends. It's of course impossible to follow something like that, but we will do our best. We'll do our best. Really, I believe that much of what has been said and the examples from Fiji, from Bangladesh, from Georgia, Timor-Leste, Mongolia, all of this underscore the different ways in which empowering people can accelerate progress towards sustainable development. But across Asia-Pacific, more can be done. And this is where the report that we have put together with ESCAP, UNDP, and the Asian Development Bank may come in and may be useful. The report offers a framework that identifies 4 main areas in which actions can indeed be strengthened. In a way, it's a useful way for countries, for institutions, to approach the issue of empowerment. Number 1, it is about fundamental rights. Fundamental rights must be better integrated into modern legal frameworks, which allow people to participate in civic life and guarantee basic access to services. Secondly, we need to eradicate discrimination from our norms, from our practices and institutions. This perpetuates inequality. In a way, inequality is being hardwired into some of our political and economic systems, and that is what our CSO colleague has just reminded us about. And this inequality, especially gender equality, poses a barrier to our progress across the SDGs. Number 3, vulnerable groups need to be given better access to resources and power and how these are used. Otherwise, we perpetuate inequality, not just in terms of the Gini coefficient that Hao Liang from UNDP mentioned, but inequality in terms of the access to basic resources. I'm talking about basic public services, such as healthcare and education, financial, land and technology resources, which underpin productivity, and social protection, which keeps people out of poverty. Fourth, stakeholders and civil society need to be given a greater role in shaping policies and services to cater for the most vulnerable. I know many governments are renewing commitments to open data, to accountability and transparency to enable civic engagement. We need to see this momentum continue. In short, involving people in decisions that affect them. To give you a specific example, our report shows that empowerment can strengthen our response to climate change, something that is essential as our region is not on track to fulfill the country's own aspirations on climate. It shows the impact of climate action can be significantly increased if shaped by a broader set of stakeholders, if it ensures equitable access to different resources and puts human rights at its heart. The voice of those people and communities most affected by climate change must be heard clearly by institutions working to tackle it and shape our response to it. This would help us adjust our institutional structures of decision-making on climate action. The evidence shows a more inclusive approach to climate action can accelerate the transition, the much-needed transition in our region, to renewable energy, can widen the uptake of climate-smart agricultural practices. Ultimately, how can you have climate-smart agriculture if you don't involve the farmers? It can help create climate-resilient and disaster-resilient communities. How can you create resilience in communities without involving those same communities? And it can revoke key obstacles, creating a more sustainable economy. This is just one example that you will find in the report. But the empowerment inclusion framework can be applied to all the other critical challenges of our times, including to reverse broader environmental degradation and including to address inequality that was mentioned almost by each and every panelist that has preceded me this morning. It can inform our collective efforts to empower people and accelerate sustainable development in Asia and the Pacific. I thank our colleagues at UNDP, our colleagues at ADB for joining us in putting this report together, and I hope it provides a helpful framework for your discussions and your actions at the country level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's very clear, I think, from the discussions and the statements that there is a lot that we can learn from each other. And I think we'll all agree that we have to appreciate the comments and made by all the panelists here, giving their own country experiences and telling us as to how they've been successful in bringing about greater inclusiveness. I especially thank Mr. Ambrose for bringing our attention and assuring him that I think we in the government, in the Indian government and all governments, I think have woken up, but we will also rise and do the needful. And with that, we come to the end of our panel discussion, and it's my pleasure to hand it over back to the chair.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to invite the distinguished delegates to intervene on agenda item 2, Regional Perspectives and Progress on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. To begin, I would now like to open the floor for statements and views from members and associate members. The time given for statement would be 3 minutes, please. Now, I would like to recognize the distinguished delegates from Russian Federation for statement. Please, you have the floor.
Все? Уважаемый господин председатель, дамы и господа, для меня большая честь, как представителя своей страны и президента, участвовать в 6-м Азиатско-Тихоокеанском форуме по устойчивому развитию, посвященному ряду важнейших целей устойчивого развития, включая тему глобального изменения климата. Российская Федерация высоко оценивает деятельность ESCAP, направленную на поддержание широкого диалога по проблематике устойчивого развития в АТР и наращивание содействия странам региона в достижении ЦУР с учетом их социально-экономических особенностей и приоритетов. Моя страна твердо привержена реализации повестки 2030. Российское правительство утвердило ряд ключевых политических документов, базовым из которых является концепция перехода к устойчивому развитию. Президент Российской Федерации издал Указ о национальных целях и стратегических задачах России до 2024 года. Этим документом был запущен целый ряд национальных программ в социальной, природоохранной, жилищной и транспортной сферах, а также в области цифровой экономики, образования, науки, культуры и здравоохранения. Все они созвучны целям и задачам повестки 2030. Общее руководство координационным механизмом обеспечения устойчивого развития в нашей стране осуществляет администрация президента. В этот механизм входят межведомственная рабочая группа и группа экспертов по статистическому мониторингу достижения ЦУР. На сегодня мы собираем стат-данные по 90 индикаторам из международного перечня глобальных показателей. Близка к завершению разработка национального и субнационального наборов индикаторов ЦУР и платформы отчетности. В 2020 году Россия представит свой первый добровольный национальный обзор на политическом форуме по устойчивому развитию под эгидой ЭКОСОС. Наш нынешний форум призван обсудить работу по таким ЦУР, как образование, достойная занятость и экономический рост, сокращение неравенства, климат, мир и правосудие, а также партнерство. Здесь у каждой из наших стран есть свои наработки и перспективные практики. Я хотел бы осветить российский опыт на некоторых из этих направлений. Россия запускает национальный проект образования. Он направлен на реконструкцию и строительство новых образовательных школ. Итогом станет создание новых ученических мест, в том числе для 25 тысяч детей в сельской местности. Однако наша главная задача – это формирование современной цифровой образовательной среды. Мы внедряем такие новые формы образования, как мобильные детские технопарки, центры профессиональной подготовки. Всего по стране 5000 мастерских с охватом 1,5 миллиона обучающихся. Кроме того, государственные субсидии в 2019 году получат 80 университетов в 40 регионах России. В Российской Федерации осуществляется комплекс мер по обеспечению условий для достойного труда. Прежде всего, они нацелены на получение справедливого дохода. С учетом появления новых нестандартных форм занятости, растущей мобильности, отдельных сегментов рынка труда, изменения характера трудовых отношений, к их реализации активно привлекается частный бизнес, в котором занята почти половина россиян. Благодаря целенаправленной экономической политике правительства мы удерживаем уровень безработицы на отметке порядка 5%, что является достойным показателем на мировом рынке труда. В реализации повестки 2030 ключевое значение имеет преодоление неравенства. В нашей стране борьба с неравенством основывается на активной экономической политике, подразумевающей реализацию крупных инфраструктурных проектов, меры по стимулированию промышленного и сельскохозяйственного производства, обеспечение благоприятных условий для торговли, вовлечение в производственные цепочки малого и среднего бизнеса. Одним из главных условий обеспечения устойчивого развития является решение проблемы глобального изменения климата. Российская Федерация, обладая техническим опытом в этой сфере, оказывает добровольную донорскую, техническую и экспертную помощь странам-членам ESCAP. Наше содействие на климатическом треке направлено прежде всего на подготовку кадров, укрепление производственного потенциала, развитие инфраструктуры в целях уменьшения опасности бедствий, сокращения задолженности, энергетику, торговлю, здравоохранение и экологию. Россия является значимым донором ООН в целях развития. В 2017 году объем официальной помощи России в целях развития составил 1 миллиард 189 тысяч долларов США. Если же говорить конкретно об ESCAP, то за весь период нашего проектного сотрудничества с комиссией реализовано более 40 проектов с общим объемом российского финансирования 9,4 миллиона долларов США. Рассчитываю, что нынешний форум будет содействовать выработке практических рекомендаций политических установок. Желаю всем плодотворной работы. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you, distinguished delegate from Russian Federation. Now I invite the distinguished delegate from China. Your time is 3 minutes.
Okay. 尊敬的大会主席、各位代表、各位同事，我首先祝贺第6届亚太可持续发展论坛的召开，感谢联合国亚太经社会和泰国政府为会议所做的精心准备和周到安排。发展是改善民生之本，是实现地区乃至全球和平与繁荣的重要基石。2030年可持续发展议程凝聚了各国人民对美好生活的向往，是国际社会针对发展问题的综合性行动方案。这个议程落实得好，不仅有助于消除南北发展鸿沟，释放世界经济增长潜力，也有助于应对其他全球性挑战，推动可持续包容发展，最终实现不让任何人掉队。本届论坛以为人民赋权，以促进包容与平等为主题，对深化亚太可持续发展合作意义重大。中方对亚太推进落实2030可持续发展议程有如下看法：一是坚持共建共享，促进包容和可持续发展。2030年可持续发展议程是全球发展的蓝图，对帮助各国，特别是发展中国家实现增长、缩小发展鸿沟、解决不平等问题具有重要意义。亚太经社会在众多联合国机构中走在前列，率先制定了落实2030年可持续发展议程的行动路线图。我们应以路线图为指引，聚焦发展这一根本任务，帮助发展中国家加强能力建设，努力消除贫困和不平等现象，共同营造人人免于匮乏、获得发展、享有尊严的光明前景。二是坚持互联互通，构建联动发展格局。互联互通是亚太经社会的长期优先合作领域。近年来，亚太经社会缔结了泛亚铁路、亚洲高速公路网、亚太陆港3项政府间协定，在联合国机构中率先通过互联互通相关决议。我们要通过促进这些协定的实施，深化亚太交通互联互通网络建设，同时应用交通领域的成功经验，在通讯、能源、贸易和金融等领域构建全面高效的互联互通网络，打造区域联动发展新格局。三是坚持共同繁荣，形成发展合力。落实2030年可持续发展议程是一项长期任务，需要各方持之以恒，共同努力。各国应把2030年可持续发展议程纳入本国发展战略，将本国发展与重大国际合作倡议相结合，实现相互促进、平衡推进经济社会环境发展，重点关注消除贫困、卫生、教育等民生问题。国际社会应强化发展伙伴关系，构建以联合国为核心、 南北合作为主渠道、南南合作为补充的合作格局。主席先生，中国作为世界上最大的发展中国家，始终坚持发展是第一要务。我们高度重视落实2030年可持续发展议程，率先发布了落实议程的国别方案和进展报告。我们统筹推进5位一体总体布局，着力推进高质量发展，加快推进国内落实2030年可持续发展议程工作，在多个领域实现早期收获，并将于2020年实现在现有标准下农村贫困人口全部脱贫的目标，提前10年实现减贫领域可持续发展目标。这将是对中国对全世界人类做出的重大贡献。今年4月，我们将在北京举办第2届“一带一路”国际合作高峰论坛。中方相信，在各方共同努力下，第2届高峰论坛一定会取得积极成果，为各国和世界经济增长挖掘更多动力，为国际经济合作开辟更大空间，为全球可持续发展做出新的重要贡献。主席先生，亚太地区是最具增长潜力的地区，但也面临贫困、发展失衡等重要挑战。联合国亚太经社会在推动亚太地区国家落实2030年可持续发展议程中发挥着重要作用。中方期待并支持联合国亚太经社会大力推动落实2030年可持续发展议程，更好造福亚太国家和人民，为实现亚太地区繁荣与稳定作出积极贡献。中国愿同亚太经社会共同努力，推动今年联大框架下可持续发展高级别政治论坛取得积极成果，为在全球范围内推进可持续发展注入新动力。谢谢。
Thank you, distinguished delegates from China. Now, I request to the delegate of Republic of Korea to give the statement. The time is 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. It is concerning that inequality is on the rise in Asia Pacific, and my country is no exception. The lesson we learned over the last decades is that too much focus on growth will result in a socio-economic divide. In that sense, as the UNDP regional director said earlier, economic growth is not enough. It must be inclusive. Against this backdrop, equality and inclusion have been the vision of my country since the current administration took office in May 2017. Underscoring the importance of developing an inclusive nation as an axis that sustains the country, my government has put in place a number of legal and policy measures to address inequality. The minimum wage has been increased by 16% in 2018 from 2017, and this is the largest increase in history. While efforts were made in the past to increase women's representation in the public sector, more concrete and ambitious targets have been introduced. The year of 2019 is the first year of an innovative, inclusive nation of Korea, and my government recently adopted a comprehensive action plan to strengthen social integration and ensure social sustainability. As part of this plan, more attention will be given to disadvantaged children. High school education will be provided for all students free of charge by 2021. A wider range of services will be made available for public with disabilities. Vocational training opportunities will be increased for vulnerable populations such as non-regular workers. I would like to emphasize that well-designed and targeted measures can and will remove discriminatory practices and social stereotypes. Without conscious efforts by the government, the integrated causes of inequality cannot be addressed effectively. As some of the new measures are being put in place in my country to tackle inequalities, we wish to share our success stories and lessons learned from these efforts with our neighbors in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished delegates from Republic of Korea. Now I invite Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you also to ESCAP and the Royal Kingdom of Thailand for the excellent arrangement. Indonesia believes that inclusiveness and equality is not only the objective to be achieved, but also as the means to achieve the SDGs. Guided by the principle, Indonesia enacted presidential decree on SDGs in 2017 to ensure that inclusiveness and equality is implemented in national and subnational level. Therefore, SDGs is now the common language and framework for all stakeholders. The National SDGs Action Plan that was launched in 2018 is a joint effort of government institutions and 108 non-state actor organizations to achieve SDGs. Voluntary National Review 2017 had also been undertaken with all of stakeholders from the earliest steps. In ensuring of empowering people and no one is left behind, we have the metadata of 319 Indonesia SDGs indicators that refer to the global metadata with additional and proxy indicators. In each indicator, metadata categorizes in every possible disaggregation of data, such as income level, age group, gender, urban-rural, disability, etc. Mr. Chair, while we have some significant steps to empower people in ensuring inclusiveness and equality, there are some challenges that we face. First, Indonesia is the fourth most populous country with more than 260 million population who has various ethnicities, languages, and religions who live in more than 17,000 islands. Ensuring inclusiveness and no one is left behind to all citizens is indeed not an easy task. Second, we have tried our best to have data disaggregation in ensuring no one is left behind, but capacity and resource constraint remain a problem. One example is about disability. It is not possible to have yearly data because we should rely on census and intercensus survey that is undertaken every 10 years and 5 years consecutively. Mr. Chair, Indonesia has undertaken some measures to overcome those challenges. Allow me to highlight some of them. First, in ensuring empowering people and inclusiveness into local level, we have decentralized our SDGs implementation. Currently, 19 out of 34 provinces have finalized their SDGs local action plan inclusively with all stakeholders, including the district heads and mayors. Second, to have more disaggregated and reliable data under budget constraint, we have developed data innovation through small area estimation technique. Based on the result of our exercises, the technique is quite reliable. In this regard, Chair and colleagues, for all of us to make further progress on SDGs related to empowering and ensuring inclusiveness, Indonesia has identified some possible areas for international cooperation, and we are very open to mutual partnership for the achievement of relevant SDGs targets and indicators. Mr. Chair, I would like to inform that Indonesia stands ready to submit our second VNR 2019. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished delegate from Indonesia. Now I invite to distinguished delegate from Malaysia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to be invited to the 6th Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development and to share with you an overview of how Malaysia strengthened the empowerment and inclusion of the people in Malaysia to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Mr. Chairman, empowering people defined as giving people the confidence and power to improve their lives themselves. That is why Malaysia is committed to the implementation of inclusive development as articulated in the medium-term plan of the 5-year Malaysia Plan. The plan provides an equitable opportunity for all Malaysians to participate and benefit from the economic growth. A country's development must not only be measured by its GDP, but the people's standard of living must also be taken into account. Overall, Malaysia succeeded in reducing poverty drastically from about 50% in 1970 to 16% in 1990 to 0.4% in 2016. The mean monthly household income in Malaysia increased by 6.2% per year from 2014 to 2016, while in the median monthly household income increased to 6.6% during the same period. Income disparity in the workforce was widening as higher living standards among the people was an equally important yardstick. Growing income gap, if left unchecked, could create tension and hostility and eventually lead to confrontation among Malaysians. Among the initiatives that Malaysia has implemented to increase income and continuously improve the standard of living of the people in Malaysia are through controlling and keeping the inflation low, ensure people are able to access to basic infrastructure and utilities, access to education and healthcare services, particularly in rural areas, and provide more affordable housing to poor, low and middle income households. In view of this, Malaysia also realized the importance of adopting the new urban agenda that goes beyond Sustainable Development Goal 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities. It will be impossible to address poverty, Goal 1, inequality, Goal 10, climate change, Goal 13, gender equality, Goal 5, water and sanitation, Goal 6, economic growth and employment, Goal 8, industrialization and innovation, Goal 9, and consumption and production patterns, Goal 12, without addressing the way cities are planned, grow, and function. Therefore, NUA provides strategies and actions to ensure cities and human settlements are planned, developed, and managed in sustainable ways. Malaysia is committed towards sustainable urban development, and to show Malaysia's readiness to become the hub of discussion for SDGs and new urban agenda, we have hosted the 9th session of World Urban Forum in 2018 and also recently organized the Malaysia Urban Forum in February 2019. This year, we are pleased to invite and welcome everyone here to participate in the upcoming 7th Asia Pacific Urban Forum 2019, which will be held in Penang, Malaysia from 15 to 17 October 2019. The forum will give us the opportunity to discuss 4 main themes thoroughly: the future of urban and territorial planning, dynamic governance and capacity development, financing innovation in urban infrastructure investment, and new data and technologies for smart cities. Everyone is welcome to visit the Malaysian booth outside of this hall for promotion on the 7th Asia Pacific Urban Forum 2018. Your participation is important to us, and we hope to see you in Penang, Malaysia this October. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I invite delegate from India to deliver the statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, distinguished delegates. The theme of this forum, empowering people and ensuring inclusiveness and equality, is indeed very relevant, as it will feed into the HLPF, which will happen in New York after a few months. As has been mentioned earlier by the leader of my delegation, the principle of leaving no one behind finds resonance with the Government of India's policy of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, which means collective efforts, inclusive growth. This guides all development interventions in India. I'll briefly highlight some of these interventions. India has a National Food Security Act in place which ensures food grain entitlements to nearly 2/3 of the population at highly subsidized prices. A multi-ministerial national mission called the Poshan Abhiyan has been launched in March 2018 to address the problems of stunting, undernutrition, and anemia among young children, women, adolescents, and girls by 2022. Through the mission Indradhanush, the Government of India is reaching out to each child up to 2 years and all those pregnant women who have been left uncovered by the routine immunization program. 38.8 million people have been immunized already under this program. The rural sanitation coverage has increased from 38% 5 years ago to over 98%, and India is well on its way to becoming open defecation free by October 2019. Under the Aspirational Districts program, 112 districts across India have been learning from and competing against each other to record improvements across 5 very important themes: health and nutrition, education, agriculture and water resources, financial inclusion and skill development, and basic infrastructure. The Ayushman Bharat scheme of 2018 is set to transform India's health system through 2 missions, firstly by application of 150,000 health and wellness centers, offering offering preventive and primary care, and secondly, by offering financial protection of up to that is about US dollars 7,250 per family for deprived 100 million people plus households towards secondary and tertiary health care. In the last 6 months, 1.6 million people have already been covered and given free treatment. India is committed to providing housing for all by 2022, with targets of 35 million houses in rural areas and 12 million houses in urban areas. Under the Prime Minister's Ujjwala Yojana, cooking gas connections have been provided to households relying on firewood, coal, dung cakes as the primary source of cooking. 71.6 million connections have already been issued under this program. Under the Saubhagya scheme to ensure electricity connections to all households, nearly 26 million people have already been covered. There's a wide range of scholarships, skill and entrepreneurship development programs, which have been launched by the government to address exclusionary issues. There are, again, several significant initiatives to strengthen gender equality. The scheme of Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, which means save the girl child, educate the girl child, has been effective in protecting the girl child and supporting her welfare. While 350 million bank accounts have been opened under the Prime Minister's Jan Dhan Yojana, credit needs of the informal sector have been addressed, that is banking for the unbanked, through the Prime Minister's Mudra scheme. We have a number of other initiatives which are helping us in meeting our goals under the 2030 agenda. Mr. Chairman, India places great importance to global partnerships and has been making consistent efforts to building networks within the region around the world. We are committed to working very closely with the ESCAP on the implementation of the 2020 agenda. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, distinguished delegates from India. Now I invite the distinguished delegates of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think as others have said, it is a very appropriate theme for this forum, the focus on inclusiveness and equality. We welcome this. I think that addressing inclusion and inequality, it is actually something that distinguishes the SDGs from the earlier MDGs. The SDGs are more inclusive and interlinked, and it is now more truly reflected in the overall commitment that we have to leave no one behind. In fact, Mr. Chair, the focus of Prime Minister Imran Khan's government is also on development, social justice, and inclusion. In fact, political commitment and ownership of the SDGs has been assured in Pakistan from the outset. As early as February 2016, the National Assembly of Pakistan adopted the SDGs as the National Development Agenda. And in March 2018, the National Economic Council approved the National Framework on SDGs. Through an inclusive process, we have localized the SDGs to speed up equality and inclusion. The targets of the SDGs framework were prioritized and then mapped into goals which are categorized as short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals. Policies and plans pertaining to these goals have been reviewed and aligned, and these policies and plans are focused on various interlinked dimensions of sustainable development. Due to paucity of time, I'm not going to mention the various programs that are in place, but just to highlight the few dimensions of sustainable development that we are focusing. First, for example, focus on national food security. There's a national water policy and drinking water policy and sanitation policies are in place. We have constituted a Poverty Alleviation Coordination Council for aligning and integrating various poverty alleviation and social protection initiatives. A lot of work has been done on gender equality and for fostering women economic empowerment and entrepreneurship, creation of jobs through skills building of youth, structural transformation, industry orientation, and focus on SMEs, IT sector, tourism, and other sectors like agriculture, as well as major infrastructure programs is there. For universal provision of essential basic services and infrastructure, projects have focused on housing, electricity, mobility and telecommunication. Universal social protection and financial inclusion have been prioritized, and efforts are underway for environmental sustainability through low-carbon, climate-resilient pathways.
Please consider the time.
Courtesy national climate change policy, and campaigns such as Clean and Green Pakistan. Mr. Chairman, I would, in conclusion, also tend to agree and re-emphasize the element that we in Asia Pacific, in order to achieve the SDGs for all of us on equal footing, must prioritize and must pay a lot of attention to regional cooperation, integration, and connectivity. I thank you so much.
Thank you, respected delegate from Pakistan. In the interest of time, the remaining statement for this session will be rolled over to the next session, which is in the same agenda item 2. We will now break for lunch. Now I close this session and ask the Master of Ceremony to make housekeeping announcement. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to call your attention to the proceedings this afternoon. The lunch hosted by the Executive Secretary will take place in the public foyer on the ground floor. Your liaison officers will be happy to escort all invited delegates. For all other participants, we invite you to enjoy our sustainable food options in the cafeteria on the first floor. Please be noted there are some local food stalls arranged in the garden area on the ground floor. We invite delegates to join our side events during the lunch break from 12 to 1:30 p.m. Kindly see the program on our touch screens or the main APFSD webpage for more information on parallel side events. We will also put up a slide with room information in this conference room during the break. We also invite all delegates to visit the Pavilion of Partnerships on the first and second floors during the break. Please take a few minutes to watch the SDG Help Desk video, which will take you through the available features and knowledge products and services. Also, your opinion matters, and we would like to hear back from you on the SDG Help Desk survey. Finally, we are inviting you to speak to our volunteers to calculate and offset your carbon emissions. This can be done by visiting the link you all received by email. We will resume here in ESCAP Hall at 1:30 p.m. sharp with session 2 on progress in the implementation of SDG 17. Kindly return on time to avoid delays. Thank you and enjoy your lunch. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to enjoy our sustainable food options in the cafeteria on the first floor. The lunch hosted by the Executive Secretary will take place in the public foyer on the ground floor. Please note that some local food stalls have also been arranged in the garden area on the ground floor.